Yesterday afternoon at 5:15 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Central Command issued a statement that changed the trajectory of this war. U.S. Central Command forces began launching additional self-defense strikes against multiple targets in Iran at the Commander-in-Chief's direction. That was the entire statement. No list of targets, no description of what was hit, no indication of how many strikes were conducted or what damage was inflicted. Just a confirmation that it happened, that Trump ordered it, and that Iran's continued aggression was the stated reason. Hours before those strikes began, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social in language that left absolutely no room for diplomatic interpretation. They have taken too long to negotiate a deal that would have been great for them. Now they will have to pay the price. And before the bombs even landed, he told reporters in the Oval Office exactly what was coming. We hit them hard yesterday, and we are going to hit them hard again today. What happened on June 10th, 2026 is not just another exchange of fire in a conflict that has been grinding since late February. It is a fundamental escalation in the nature of this war. The ceasefire that had been shakily holding is gone. The peace talks that were described as progressing are now described as failed. And Trump is openly telling Fox News that he is considering targeting Iran's power plants and bridges. We are not watching the end of this conflict. We are watching it shift into a more dangerous phase than anything that has come before. To understand what happened on June 10th, you have to understand the full chain of events that brought this war to this point. The U.S.-Israel military campaign against Iran began on February 28, 2026, and it immediately triggered a retaliatory response from Tehran that changed the global economy overnight. Iran moved to effectively close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which approximately 20% of the world's entire oil supply normally transits every single day. The closure was not a complete physical blockade in the traditional military sense. Iran used a combination of threatened mine-laying, missile threats against commercial shipping, and the active harassment of tankers, attempting transit to achieve what amounted to a functional shutdown of the world's most critical energy choke point. The consequences were immediate and severe. Gasoline prices in the United States are now more than $1 higher than they were a year ago. Jet. Fuel prices have more than doubled since the war began. The Consumer Price Index rose 4.2% year-on-year in May, up from 3.8% in April, a fresh 3-year high. The Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped on the news of the fresh strikes yesterday. The S&P 500 declined. Markets understand that a longer war means longer energy disruption, and longer energy disruption means sustained inflation that no central bank policy can easily counter. Trump has been trying to end this conflict through a combination of military pressure and negotiation since it began. He paused strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure twice when Tehran indicated willingness to talk. And in late March, he posted on Truth Social that, at the Iranian government's request, he was pausing the period of energy plant destruction for 10 days to allow talks to continue. He said those talks were going very well, despite what he called erroneous reporting by the fake news media. Iran, at various points, signaled through Baqa channels, including through Oman's mediation role, that it was open to a framework that would reopen the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for sanctions relief and security guarantees. There were moments when a deal seemed genuinely close. Trump himself said publicly that Iran was desperate to reach an agreement and that a deal would be great for them. The tone was one of a man who believed he was about to close a negotiation he had been pursuing for months. Then it collapsed. Iran pulled out of peace negotiations, and then came the act that triggered the June 10th escalation directly. Iran shot down a U.S. Army Apache helicopter near the Strait of Hormuz. The downing of an American military aircraft is not a minor provocation. It is an act of war against a specific asset carrying American personnel and representing American military power. Trump ordered retaliatory strikes. Tuesday night, targeting Iranian air defense systems, ground control stations, and surveillance. Radar sites, exactly the infrastructure Iran needs to protect itself from American air power. CENTCOM confirmed those strikes. And then Wednesday morning, Trump made clear in the Oval Office that he was not done. We are going to be attacking them very hard. That statement was followed hours later by the CENTCOM announcement that a second wave of strikes had begun at 5:15 p.m. Eastern. The strikes are in response to Iran's unwarranted and continued aggression, the statement said. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered the line that may define this phase of the conflict when he spoke to reporters on Wednesday. If we need to negotiate with bombs, we will negotiate with bombs. And we are very good at it. That sentence is not bluster. It is a policy statement describing exactly what Washington is doing. The military campaign is being used as a coercive instrument to force Iran to the negotiating table on terms favorable to the United States and its allies. Every strike on Iranian air defense infrastructure weakens Tehran's ability to protect its territory from further strikes. Every oil tanker interdicted in the Strait, and CENTCOM confirmed Wednesday that it fired on an Iranian cargo vessel attempting to move oil in violation of the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports, tightens the economic noose around the Iranian regime. Every escalation increases the cost of continued defiance. The logic is clear. Iran either comes to the table and makes a deal, or it keeps absorbing military and economic damage until the cost of continued resistance exceeds the cost of agreeing to terms. The problem with this logic, and it is a significant problem, is that Iran has now been absorbing military and economic damage for over 3 months and has not yet reached that breaking point. The regime, under Supreme Leader Khamenei, has spent decades building a political identity around resistance to American pressure. The entire narrative that sustains the Islamic Republic domestically is that Iran does not bow to American ultimatums. Every time Trump posts on Truth Social that Iran will pay the price, and then U.S. bombs actually fall on Iranian territory, the regime faces an internal political calculation. Accepting a deal under those conditions looks like capitulation, and a regime that accepts public capitulation under American military pressure faces questions about its own legitimacy that its entire 70 years of existence have been built to prevent. This is not an excuse for Iran's behavior. It is an analysis of why the maximum pressure plus military strikes formula, which worked quickly in some contexts, may produce a longer and more painful conflict than the optimistic timelines suggested by early statements from Washington. What makes the June 10th escalation particularly significant is Trump's statement to Fox News about what comes next. He said he may keep going, and specifically mentioned targeting Iran's power plants and bridges. This is a qualitative escalation from the air defense suppression campaign that has been the primary focus of U.S. strikes so far. Air defense systems are military targets. Targeting power plants and civilian infrastructure crosses into a category that has different legal and humanitarian implications, and that historically produces different kinds of international responses. The destruction of civilian power infrastructure in a country of 90 million people affects hospitals, water treatment, civilian food supply chains, and millions of people who have no involvement in their government's military decisions. European allies, who have largely supported the U.S. position on Iran's nuclear program and on the necessity of ending Tehran's support for regional proxy forces, would face significant domestic political pressure if the military campaign moved visibly into civilian infrastructure targeting. The international coalition that has provided diplomatic cover for the U.S.-Israel campaign since February depends on that campaign being framed as targeted military action against specific threats. Bridges and power plants are a different argument to make. The regional spillover from the June 10th escalation is already visible, and it is serious. Kuwait and Bahrain both reported incoming strikes on Wednesday and activated their air defense systems. The Jordanian military confirmed that its air defenses intercepted and shot down 5 Iranian missiles heading toward Al-Azraq, an area hosting an American military base. Jordan intercepting Iranian missiles is a significant development because Jordan is not a party to this conflict, and its territory is being used as a transit zone for Iranian fire against American assets. The fact that Iranian missiles are flying over multiple countries to reach their targets illustrates the geographic scale of what is now happening. This is not a bilateral U.S.-Iran confrontation contained within a specific operational theater. It is a conflict whose physical effects are spreading across the entire Middle Eastern regional map. The economic consequences are compounding at a rate that is now generating serious political pressure inside the United States. A Dow Jones down 0.6% on a single day of strike news is a market signal. The Consumer Price Index at 4.2% year-on-year in May is a political signal. Americans paying more than $1 extra per gallon at the gas pump every single day feel this war in their wallets, regardless of how they feel about its strategic justification. Art Hogan of B. Riley Wealth Management said it plainly to markets on Wednesday. The war with Iran seems to be getting longer, not shorter, and that does not help the psychology. The psychology of markets, of consumers, of allies, and of domestic political support for the campaign is a factor that the military planning must account for, because wars that lose domestic economic and political support become wars that change their terms in ways that military commanders do not control. Trump's framing of the June 10th escalation reveals the tension at the center of his approach. He has said simultaneously that Iran was desperate to make a deal, and that Iran has been playing the United States for suckers. He has paused strikes twice to allow negotiations to proceed, and then ordered new strikes when those negotiations stalled. He has said the deal would have been great for Iran, while also saying Iran will pay the price for not taking it. These are not contradictory statements in Trump's strategic framework. They are the dual tracks of maximum pressure diplomacy, offer a genuinely good deal while simultaneously making the cost of refusing it so high that rational actors would choose the deal. The assumption is that Tehran's cost-benefit calculation will eventually tip toward acceptance. The question this moment raises is whether that assumption is correct about this particular regime at this particular stage of its confrontation with American power. The ceasefire that existed in some form before June 10th is now effectively gone. CENTCOM's statement that Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz and attacked a U.S. warship was denied by American commanders even as the broader conflict continued. The competing claims about what exactly happened in the Strait on Wednesday are a sign of how chaotic and rapidly evolving the operational situation is. When the two parties to an active military conflict cannot agree on what happened in a specific engagement hours after it occurred, the risk of miscalculation producing an unintended escalation increases significantly. 13 U.S. troops have died in this conflict since it began on February 28th. Hundreds more have been injured. Iran has absorbed strikes on its air defense infrastructure, its military assets, and its energy export capacity. Neither side has yet reached the breaking point that produces a negotiated end. What Trump has now put on the table with the power plant and bridge statement is the question of whether the United States is willing to escalate to the level of targeting Iranian civilian infrastructure at scale. The answer to that question will determine whether this conflict finds an off-ramp in the coming weeks, or whether it continues to escalate into something with consequences for the global economy, for regional stability, and for American military commitments that go far beyond what the early optimism of late February anticipated. The strikes that began at 5:15 p.m. Eastern on June 10, 2026, are not the end of this story. They may be the beginning of its most consequential chapter. Iran will pay the price, Trump said. The question the world is now asking is what that price ultimately costs everyone.